Aha! Good morning. Welcome to part 2 of Nikolai Gogol's The Nose. Now, in full disclosure, I actually read this yesterday. I had the brilliant idea that I have this beautiful lawn that I rent, and the place looks like, I call it the Palace of Versailles lawn. But it turns out there's difficulties when you go outside to do something. For instance, there's a large ball of fire in the sky, and it seems to make one squint and make your head burn. Second, I was not aware that there were cars passing on the road because I was so intent in what I was doing. In the video, all you could really be aware of was cars passing me on the side of the road. And finally, I noticed my cat, Zoe, is walking around, and I'm thinking he's under my chair. And I sort of make a joke. Oh, I make perfect shade. Only in watching the video did I realize he was standing behind me the whole time. So, let's do part 2 again in a more controlled environment. One where we're not distracted by passing cars, flies landing on my nose, a blistering sun, and a cat who's not at all where I think he is. If you remember, the last time we left off, the barber, Ivan Yakovlevich, had found a nose in a loaf of baked bread, and his problem was, how did he get rid of it? And we left him, he was, kowtowing before a cop of some kind back then, who was saying, no, you need to explain to me what you just dropped in the river, and I don't need you to shave me for free as a bribe. I've got 3 other barbers that want to do that for me. And then Gogol sort of, I think, lost interest in the scene, because if you remember, he said, Ivan Yakovlevich grew pale. But here the strange episode vanishes in mist, and what further happened is not known. My guess is Gogol said, that scene's played itself out, let's move on. And so shall we to part 2. And I'm not just saying it's part 2 because it's the second video, it's part 2. Kovalov, the member of the municipal committee, awoke fairly early that morning and made a droning noise, brr, brr, through his lips, as he always did, though he could not say why. He stretched himself and told his valet to give him a little mirror which was on the table. He wished to look at the heat boil which had appeared on his nose the previous evening, but to his great astonishment, he saw that instead of his nose, he had a perfectly smooth vacancy in his face. Thoroughly alarmed, he ordered some water to be brought, and rubbed his eyes with a towel. Sure enough, he no longer had a nose. Then he sprang out of bed and shook himself violently. No nose any more. He dressed himself and went at once to the police superintendent. But before proceeding further, we must certainly give the reader some information about Kovalov, so that he may know what sort of man this member of the municipal committee really was. These committeemen, who obtained that title by means of certificates of learning, must not be compared with the committeemen appointed for the Caucasus district, who are of quite a different kind. The learned committeeman, but Russia is such a wonderful country, that when one committeeman is spoken of, all the others from Riga to Kamchatka refer to it themselves. You know Kamchatka. That's a little piece of land on risk that you attack Alaska from. The same is true of all the other titled officials. Kovalov had been a Caucasian. Caucasian's not color. He's from the district of Caucasus. Committeeman 2 years previously, and could not forget that he had occupied that position. But in order to enhance his own importance, he never called himself committeeman, but major. Listen, my dear, he used to say when he met an old woman in the street who sold shirt fronts. Go to my house in Sadovia Street and ask, does Major Kovalov live here? Any child can tell you where it is. Accordingly, we will call him for the future Major Kovalov. It was his custom to take a daily walk on the Nevsky Avenue. The collar of his shirt was always remarkably clean and stiff. He wore the same style of whiskers as those that are worn by governors of districts, architects, and regimental doctors. In short, all those who have full red cheeks and play a good game of whist. These whiskers grow straight from the cheek towards the nose. Major Kovaloff wore a number of seals, on some of which were engraved armorial bearings, and others the names of the days of the week. He had come to St. Petersburg with a view of obtaining some position corresponding to his rank, if possible that of vice-governor of a province, but he was prepared to be content with that of a bailiff, in some department or other. He was, moreover, not disinclined to marry, but only such a lady who could bring with her a dowry of 200,000 rubles. Accordingly, the reader can judge for himself what his sensations were when he found in his face, instead of a fairly symmetrical nose, a broad, flat vacancy. To increase his misfortune, not a single droshky was to be seen in the street. A droshky was a carriage, horse carriage, and so he was obliged to proceed on foot. He wrapped himself up in his cloak, and held his handkerchief to his face as though his nose bled. But perhaps it is all only my imagination. It is impossible that a nose should drop off in such a silly way, he thought, and stepped into a confectioner's shop in order to look into the mirror. Fortunately, no customer was in the shop. Only small shop boys were cleaning it out and putting chairs and tables straight. Others with sleepy faces were carrying fresh cakes on trays, and yesterday's newspaper stained with coffee were still lying about. Thank God no one is here, he said to himself. Now I can look at myself leniently. He stepped gingerly up to a mirror and looked. What an infernal face, he exclaimed, and spat with disgust. If there was only something there instead of the nose, but there is absolutely nothing. He bit his lips with vexation, left the confectioner's, and resolved, quite contrary to his habit, neither looked nor smiled at anyone on the street. Suddenly he halted, as if rooted to the spot before a door where something extraordinary happened. A carriage drew up at the entrance. The carriage door was opened, and a gentleman in uniform came out and hurried up the steps. How great was Kovaloff's terror and astonishment when he saw that it was his own nose. At this extraordinary sight, everything turned. Oh, okay. So his nose got out of a carriage by itself and went walking up the steps. Yes, that would create quite a consternation. Everything seemed to turn round with him. He felt as though he could hardly keep upright on his legs. But, though trembling all over as though with fever, he resolved to wait till the nose should return to the carriage. After about 2 minutes, the nose actually came out again. It wore a gold-embroidered uniform with a stiff, high collar, trousers of chamois leather, and a sword hung at its side. The hat, adorned with a plume, showed that it held the rank of a state councillor. It was obvious that it was paying duty calls. He looked round on both sides, called to the coachman, "Drive on," and got into the carriage, which drove away. Poor Kovaloff nearly lost his reason. He did not know what to think of this extraordinary procedure. And indeed, how was it possible that the nose, which only yesterday he had on his face, and which could neither walk nor drive, should wear a uniform? He ran after the carriage, which fortunately had stopped a short way off before the Grand Bazaar of Moscow. He hurried towards it and pressed through the crowd of beggar women with their faces bound up, leaving only 2 openings for the eyes, over whom he had formerly so often made merry, and he's a little snotty to him. There were only a few people in front of the bazaar. Kovaloff was so agitated that he could decide on nothing, and looked for the nose everywhere. At last he saw it standing before a shop. It seemed half buried in its stiff collar, and was attentively inspecting the wares displayed. How can I get at it, thought Kovaloff? Everything, the uniform, the hat, and so on, show that it is a state councillor. How the deuce has this happened? He began to cough discreetly near it, but the nose paid him not the least attention. "Honorable sir," said Kovaloff at last, plucking up courage. "Honorable sir." And there's a certain rank. In other words, he hesitates to speak to the nose because it outranks him. "What do you want?" asked the nose, and turned round. "It seems to me strange, most respected sir. You should know where you belong, and I find you all of a sudden where? Judge yourself." "Pardon me. I do not understand what you are talking about. Explain yourself more distinctly." How shall I make my meaning plainer to him? Then, plucking up fresh courage, he continued, Naturally. Besides, I am a major. You must admit it is not befitting I should go about without a nose. An old apple woman on the Ascension Bridge may carry on her business without one, but since I am on the lookout for a post, besides, in many houses I am acquainted with ladies of high position, Madame Chupiev, wife of a state councilor, and many others. So you see, I do not know, honorable sir, what you— Here the major shrugged his shoulders. Pardon me. If one regards the matter from the point of view of duty and honor, you will yourself understand. I understand nothing, answered the nose. I repeat, please explain yourself more distinctly. Honorable sir, said Kovalov with dignity, I do not know how I am to understand your words. It seems to me the matter is as clear as possible. Or do you wish— But you are, after all, my own nose. The nose looked at the major and wrinkled its forehead. There you are wrong, respected sir. I am myself. Besides, there can be no close relations between us. To judge by the buttons of your uniform, you must be in quite a different department to mine. So saying, the nose turned away. Kovalov was completely puzzled. He did not know what to do, and still less what to think. At this moment he heard the pleasant rustling of a lady's dress, and there approached an elderly lady wearing quantity of lace, and by her side her graceful daughter in a white dress which set off her slender figure to advantage, and wearing a light straw hat. Behind the ladies marched a tall lackey with long whiskers. I'm struck by the story, which, remember, is almost 200 years old. Everybody has— if you have any money at all, you have a servant with you. They just call him flat out a lackey. Also struck by his description of this woman that he finds attractive. Not much has changed these days, as we'll see. Kovalov advanced a few steps, adjusted his cambric collar, arranged his seals which hung by a little gold chain, and with a smiling face fixed his eyes on the graceful lady, who bowed lightly like a spring flower, and raised to her brow her little white hand with transparent fingers. He smiled still more when he spied under the brim of her hat her little round chin, and part of her cheek faintly tinted with rose color. But suddenly he sprang back as though he had been scorched. He remembered that he had nothing but an absolute blank in place of a nose, and tears started to his eyes. He turned round in order to tell the gentleman in uniform that he was only a state councilor in appearance, but really a scoundrel and a rascal, and nothing else but his own nose. But the nose was no longer there. He had had time to go, doubtless in order to continue his visits. His disappearance plunged Kovalov into despair. He went back and stood for a moment under a colonnade, looking around him on all sides in hope of perceiving the nose somewhere. He remembered very well that it wore a hat with a plume in it, and a gold-embroidered uniform, but he had not noticed the shape of the cloak, nor the color of the carriages and the horses, nor even whether a lackey stood behind it, and if so, what sort of livery he wore. Moreover, so many carriages were passing that it would have been difficult to recognize one, and even if he had done so, there would have been no means of stopping it. The day was fine and sunny. An immense crowd was passing to and fro in the Nevsky Avenue. A variegated stream of ladies flowed along the pavement. There was his acquaintance, the privy councillor, whom he was accustomed to style General, especially when strangers were present. And of course you understand why. In this rank, obsessed society, if he had a friend named General that he could call General, well, that reflected glory on him. You know, it'd be like friends of a CEO. That's my friend over there. He's CEO. There was Arjun, his intimate friend, who was always lost in the evenings at whist, and another major, who had obtained the rank of committeeman in the Caucasus, beckoned to him. "Go to the deuce," said Kovalov's sotto voice. "Hi, coachman, drive me straight to the superintendent of police." So saying, he got into a droshky and continued to shout all the time to the coachman, "Drive hard." "Is the police superintendent at home?" he asked on entering the front hall. "No, sir," answered the porter. "He has just gone out." "Ah, just as I thought." "Yes," continued the porter, "he has only just gone out. If you'd been a moment earlier, you would have perhaps have caught him. Kovalov, still holding his handkerchief to his face, re-entered the droshky and cried in a despairing voice, "Drive on!" "Where?" asked the coachman. "Straight on." "But how?" "There are crossroads here. Shall I go to the right or to the left?" This question made Kovalov reflect. In his situation it was necessary to have recourse to the police, not because the affair had anything to do with him directly, but because he acted more promptly than other authorities. As for demanding any explanation of the department to which the nose claimed to belong, it would, he felt, be useless. For the answer of that gentleman showed that he regarded nothing as sacred, and he might just as likely have lied in this matter as in saying that he had never seen Kovalov. But just as he was about to order the coachman to drive to the police station, the idea occurred to him that this rascally scoundrel who, at their first meeting, had behaved so disloyally towards him, might, profiting by the delay, quit the city secretly, and then all his searching would be in vain, or might last over a whole month. Finally, as though visited with a heavenly inspiration, he resolved to go directly to an advertisement office, and to advertise the loss of his nose, giving all its distinctive characteristics in detail, so that anyone who found it might bring it at once to him, or at any rate inform him where it lived. Having decided on this course, he ordered the coachman to drive to the advertisement office, and all the way continued to punch him in the back. "Quick, scoundrel, quick!" And so, let's end this for today. We'll pick it up tomorrow with a third section of The Nose.